Good morning, depending on where you're joining us from, and welcome to our 16th Webinar Wednesday, again featuring two of Israel's and BGU's best and brightest experts in the field of the impact of global climate change. Professor Daniel Chamovitz, the president of Ben-Gurion University, is with us today, and an expert on plant genetics, as well as Professor Sigal Abramovich, a faculty member of the Department of Earth and Environmental Sciences at Ben-Gurion University. Shalom, bonjour, and hello to all of you who have registered from around the globe, to be exact, Israel, England, Scotland, France, the United States, and of course, from Canada. We might also have some more of our colleagues from the Associates of Offices in Europe, South America, and Mexico. I'm Galit Solomon. I'm the Director of Marketing and Communications here with Canadian Associates of Ben-Gurion University, and it's my pleasure and honor to be moderating today's program. I'm thrilled to tell you that we have once again well over 100 registered participants for the webinar, and we expect even more to watch us live streaming on Facebook Live. We also had done this in the past, as you know. Our staff here, our lay leaders and myself, we spend many hours discussing which experts and from which field to invite from BGU, and we believe that so far we've chosen quite wisely. Each webinar has really resonated with our supporters and friends. Our format today will be similar to our other webinars. We will first introduce the president of BGU, Professor Daniel Chamovitz, and after he finishes, we will then introduce Professor Abramovich. Each will speak for 15 minutes or so, and we'll be giving them a 2-minute warning before they are to finish their presentation, because of course we want to ensure that we're getting to those very important questions from our audience. I will be moderating the question portion of today's webinar as well. For our listeners, whoever has comments or questions, please be sure to share. At the bottom of the screen, you will find an icon that's labeled Q&A. Please enter your questions into that space. Now remember, the topic today is the global impact of climate change, its effects and challenges. It is now my honor and pleasure to introduce Professor Daniel Chamovitz, the 7th president of Ben-Gurion University. Before coming to Ben-Gurion, Daniel Chamovitz was dean of the George Wise Faculty of Life Sciences at Tel Aviv University and the founder of the program in food safety and security. Professor Chamovitz grew up in Aliquippa, Pennsylvania. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, a town reminiscent of the one portrayed in The Deer Hunter, and studied at both Columbia and Hebrew universities, where he received his doctorate in genetics. He continued his postdoctoral work at Yale and returned to Israel on the prestigious Alon Fellowship by the Council for Higher Education for Outstanding Young Researchers. He has held numerous positions as a visiting scientist both in Peking and the US, and his book, What a Plant Knows, is not only a bestseller on Amazon, but has been translated into 19 languages and has been featured on media outlets around the world. Professor Chamovitz, the screen is yours.
Thanks very much, Galit, for the very warm introduction. I'm really happy that you could all be with us today, this evening, this morning, afternoon, wherever I find you. Today's format for me is going to be a little bit different. Rather than tell you about the wonderful things that Ben-Gurion University does, what a remarkable university we are. Well, actually, that we are Israel's, the most important university for the future of Israel. I want to tell today, actually, a very personal story about what brought me to this webinar today about global climate change impacts. Now, as Galit mentioned, I grew up in the United States. I was a member of a Jewish Zionist youth movement, Young Judea. My father is a physician. My sister's a physician. My 3 uncles were physicians. I have 3 cousins who are physicians. It's one of those families where being a physician was part of the genetics. And until age 19, I was pretty sure that that was my future also. But now I'm going to share with you a picture. You have to promise not to take any screenshots of what I looked like at a very specific day at age 19. Okay, this is me, age 19, at Kibbutz Keturah in the south of Israel, about 2 hours south of Ben-Gurion University, driving a tractor with a lot more hair than I have now. So what was the importance of this picture for me? Because when I was this tractor driver in the kibbutz, I was a tractor driver through alfalfa fields. I don't know how many of you have ever driven a tractor. While it sounds very, very exciting, it's actually quite boring. You put the tractor in gear and you go straight for 20 minutes or however long the field is, turn around and go straight again. But it gives you a lot of time to think. And I was driving the tractor through the alfalfa fields. I noticed that when you cut the alfalfa, it grows back. But when you cut wheat, it doesn't. Now, at the time, I knew absolutely nothing about plant biology, nothing about agriculture. But I had a eureka moment where I said, if we could understand why the alfalfa grows back and the wheat doesn't, and utilize this knowledge in agriculture, perhaps actually we could feed the world. And maybe this would be as important as another physician in the family. And it was on that day that I stopped being pre-med and then I thought I was going to be pre-ag. But it was that decision that got me to study plant genetics, do a PhD in plant genetics, come back to Israel as a scientist because I got very interested in the basic biology of plants. But always in the back of my mind was this understanding is that the reason that we do the best basic science that we can is because we never know where our discoveries are going to lead. Every important discovery that has influenced our life has its origins in basic research. We see it today very clearly with the COVID-19 vaccines, especially the RNA vaccines, which were developed originally in universities over 2 decades ago. But getting back to my story, as Galit mentioned, at one point through my career, I started looking more into how can we feed the world and started asking the questions, trying to understand what gets in our way of feeding the world. So if we look at what these challenges are, it's important that we feed the world because throughout all of history, both 4,000, 5,000 years ago and 1 year ago, food security affects our daily life. In Jewish history, why did Abraham go down to Egypt? Because there was a famine in the land. Food security causing migrations of people, which change history. If we look here, these are the hundreds of thousands of refugees coming out of Syria, walking to Europe. Why did they make this move? Because there was a famine, a lack of food in Syria. So food security has always influenced human history. It's crucial to peace. It's crucial to our development. It's crucial to our culture. How happy are we when we're eating foods that bring back memories to us? Now, the world's at a very dangerous place right now when we talk about food security, because as we speak, we're approaching 8 billion people in the world. And that's more than twice the number of people who were in the world when I was born. And it's more than almost 8 times the number of people 4 times the number of people in the world when my parents were born, and almost 8 times the number of people who were in the world when my great-grandparents were born. So we see here there's this massive increase in population, which means, of course, we have to produce more and more and more food. At the same time, there's this massive increase in population. There's also a massive increase in urbanization. This is where I used to live in Israel in Hod HaSharon. This entire neighborhood, just 10 years ago, were orange groves and strawberry fields, which were torn down, destroyed to make room for more apartment buildings. It makes sense. The more people we have in the world, the less land that's going to be available for agriculture. And actually, we are losing millions of acres of agricultural land each year due to urbanization. Now, the good news is that we've been able to keep up with this because for every year over the past century, farmers have increased yields through the use of technology. But over the past decade, these gains in yield have leveled off. But then there is the largest threat to our ability to feed the world: climate change. Climate change. Our planet, as we know, it's changing. And if we allow these temperatures to continue to rise, there's a chance it'll wilt. And as our world faces the consequences of undisciplined use of natural resources and the destruction of nature on a global scale, we begin to experience changes in climate, bizarre patterns of floods, droughts, wildfires, heat waves, storms, blizzards, northeasterns. We feel it all the time. Global climate change is undoubtedly the challenge after COVID of this generation. But this is not about the weather. It's an assault on nature itself, creating changes that disrupt the very fabric of life. It's not the problem of one country. It's not the problem of one continent. It's a problem for the whole of humanity. Now, the deserts have always been the theater of human struggle. Here, survival has always been dependent on human ingenuity. And for over 5 decades, scientists at Ben-Gurion University of the Negev have been learning how to thrive in this desert. It's been a priority born out of necessity, bringing mass-scale desalination and advanced irrigation to the world, unlocking the secrets of dryland agriculture, tackling the challenges of water security and food security, while developing advanced energy and cooling technologies. So what was once a local problem has become a global crisis, obligating us at BGU to share our knowledge with the world through the establishment of the Ben-Gurion University School of Sustainability and Climate Change, the first time it's being announced publicly this evening. The school will attract the most prominent young scientists, and this revolutionary enterprise will educate the next generation of climate change experts. We'll utilize decades of invaluable knowledge and know-how while taking advantage of the expertise of our 3 campuses. A cross-unit collaboration on a massive scale, connecting over 150 research labs and multiple research centers to generate impactful solutions for survival in this global climate change. And working hand in hand with industry and government, translating local approaches into global solutions that will change our lives and the lives of the entire future generations. It's a transdisciplinary approach to generate real solutions to real world problems. So climate change is the threat to our food supply. How does it go back to what I do? Because we need to remember what the past head of the FAO said. Hunger is not an issue of charity. It's an issue of justice. No parent, no mother should have to go to sleep wondering where her children's next meal is going to come from. So our School of Sustainability and Climate Change is a place that no one can afford not to be a part of. You can't afford to not be a part of this world-changing venture. We owe it to our children, we owe it to our grandchildren, and we owe it to our great-grandchildren. This venture is going to change the university, but more than that, it's going to change the world. As David Ben-Gurion said, the answers, the future will emanate from the Negev. And the amazing, remarkable scientists at Ben-Gurion University, of which Professor Sigal Abramovich is a prime example, are going to be leading this adventure. Before you move on to Sigal and before you introduce her, she has been instrumental, one of the 5 leaders to set up this school. It's been an incredible responsibility, and I'm super, amazingly excited for what the future is going to bring. Thanks very much. You're on mute, Galit.
There we go. Fascinating information, Professor Chamovitz. You're a fantastic storyteller. And just hearing where your interest in food security began is absolutely inspiring to see how far you've come from that moment sitting on that tractor. So thank you so much for sharing that fabulous presentation. Next up, we've got Professor Sigal Abramovich. She has been a faculty member for the Department of Earth and Environmental Sciences at BGU since 2015. She completed her bachelor at BGU and went on for her PhD at Princeton in the field of geosciences. She is currently the president of the Geological Society of Israel and the representative of Israel at the International Union of Geological Sciences, IUGS. Sigal, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, yeah.
Thank you so much for this kind introduction. I'm really pleased to take part in this webinar. Today I'm going to present the talk about single-cell marine organisms called foraminifera. These are major carbonate producers. Their shells are made of calcite, and they produce it in massive numbers, and they're found throughout the ocean. And this is why they represent the best archive of present and past global climate changes. I'm going to share with you some of our ongoing research on living foraminifera and their use as bioindicators of global warming, particularly in shallow water ecosystems. So what I want to say is that the broader framing of my talk is the scientific message that we are already entered a new geological epoch called the Anthropocene. And basically, which means that we are the dominant force of changes in nature. And these changes exceed the natural variability, both in the scale and the speeds that these processes take place. Now, we already started to see the cracks of the resilience of Earth systems back in the 1980s and more intensively in the 1990s. First with the discovery of the hole in the ozone in 1982, and later with the accumulating evidences that both the surface of land and the surface of the oceans are getting warm. And by the year of 2017, we already reached 1 degree warming, and this is relative to the temperature of the period prior to the Industrial Revolution. Now, climate models talk about a tipping point of 1.5 degrees in which beyond that, many of these feedback processes will be irreversible or of high magnitude. So the landmark agreement, Paris Agreement, that was signed by in 2016 by many countries, basically adopted these recommendations, and by saying that we have to reduce the carbon emission down to 0 by the year of 2050. And the sooner we do it, the better the chance that we reach this goal of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees. So geologically speaking, Earth has gone through many dramatic climatic changes through time. And this is a really nice example looking at the lower diagram showing the last 500,000 years. These are record form geochemical analysis of foraminifera from various oceans showing changes from interglacial to glacial cycles. There are about 5 or 7 of them. And the last one, the last ice age or glacial cycle ended about 11,700 years ago, and which started the Holocene period. Now, these changes are attributed to small variation in the Earth orbit, which are called Milankovitch cycle, which causes some differences in the amount of solar energy that reach Earth. Now, so we can ask the question of why do we care about 1 degree or 1.5 degree warming when it has such a record of geological record of dramatic climatic changes? And the answer for that is that we are looking at abnormal behavior or abnormal phenomena. And this is coming from very interesting evidence from ice cores like this one taken from Antarctica or other places like Greenland, that they have where we can take long ice cores that cover hundreds of thousands of years and air bubbles that are trapped inside this ice. We can measure the carbon dioxide concentration. These ones show that the level of the current level since the 50s actually exceeds any natural variation between glacial and interglacial cycles. So we are talking about an anthropogenic footprint of greenhouse gases, which are coupled with warm temperatures. Now, as an oceanographer, I can tell you that the ocean play a major role in mitigating climate changes by absorbing much of the increased heat, because they cover, they're very thick and they cover a great percentage of Earth surfaces. And this is a very nice figure from Chang et al. In 2020, showing how much increase there was in the ocean heat budget since the 1990s. Now, oceans also play a major role in the biology of Earth systems. They harbor the greatest diversity of life, and many of the marine organisms are highly sensitive to climate warming, especially the ones that are coming from shallow marine habitats, particularly the calcifiers that are also an important part of the carbon cycle. Now, in my lab, we're promoting the use of foraminifera as an ideal modern organism to monitor response to global climate change, but also to other anthropogenic pollution by combining biological and geological tools and studying, taking materials from different parts of the oceans. In this talk particularly, I will focus on specific, very interesting type of foraminifera group called large symbiont-bearing benthic foraminifera. These are relatively large foraminifera. They reach up to several centimeters, and they typically inhabit clear, warm, tropical, shallow water, tropical water, in association with coral reef ecosystem. And similar to corals, they host diverse type of single-cell algal symbionts, and which you can see here in these figures, and the numbers reach thousands of specimens. So they provide extra energy for the host. And these foraminifera produce massive amount of carbonate, and their production is estimated to be about 43 million tons per year. So in a sense, they are ecosystem engineers in this environment. And I couldn't resist showing you a photo of famous large benthic foraminifera fossils from Nahal Tzafit in the Arava Valley. These are the nummulites. They're very famous fossils from the Eocene period, 55 million years ago. And this shows you a nice representation of how we can study the fossil together with the living one and understand changes through time. So we are studying at BGU, we're in a great location, as Danny said, in the middle of the desert. And this is basically a geological park for us that allows me to study environmental events such as the one in the Cretaceous period and study the extinction of the dinosaurs. But as an oceanographer, I also have a direct access to two very different oceanic provinces. One is the Mediterranean, which is a miniature ocean and a relic of the Great Tethyan Ocean. And the other one is the Red Sea, which is a relic or it is actually a young tectonic branch of the Red Sea. Now, specifically, the Mediterranean is an ideal field laboratory for study global warming. And this is, as you can see here in this thermal map, it's already showed the 1 degree warming since 2009 or so. So, so this warming trend follows the global trend, and it has major effect on the local ecosystem. Now, in our study, we focus on shallow rocky habitat environments, which are very common from central to northern part of Israel. These are beautiful areas, and they are favorable for symbiont-bearing foraminifera. We can find them in extremely abundant, hundreds of thousands of specimens per gram sediments. They're technically accessible. We could just dip our legs and use our very sophisticated equipment to sample them. But they're also scientifically important because they're strongly influenced by coastal industry, which is quite common along the Israeli coast of the Mediterranean, and they're also susceptible for climate changes. And here is a position of a typical foraminifera attached to macroalgae in these environments. So one of the major outcome of the recent warming in the Eastern Mediterranean is that it promotes the migration of Indo-Pacific species into the Mediterranean through the Suez Canal. This is known as the Lessepian invasion, named after the engineer that designed the canal. So it was actually opened fully established in 1859, but the more intensive migration actually occurred since the 80s, and this is again due to the warming. So there are many invaders that basically took over many of the endemic species. And you can see here, Israel is actually a hotspot for these invader taxa, as you can see, this red line represented the highest abundance of invaded species. Now, foraminifera take major part in this invasion, and one of the first questions that we needed to answer is whether these new population or these recent populations that we see in the Mediterranean are actually invading species, or maybe they are some reviving population from the Tethys that just enjoyed the new temperatures. And this is because many of the suspected invaders have fossil representative even in recent sediments, like the one we find in ancient Roman port of Caesarea. So there are no morphological indication that these are actually newly invaded population. So what we did here actually is that we did run a genetic comparison between Red Sea population that were taken from Eilat and the ones that were collected from the Mediterranean. And we use a quite simple and straightforward genetic approach. We analyzed single specimens, the DNA of single specimens, and use a design barcoding system of the barcode region of the DNA, which include conservative and variable parts. And it behaves like a commercial barcode, which you can compare the genetic background, the genetic relationship between different population or even different species. And we created a lot of these molecular phylogeny charts or trees that allow us to compare the ones that we analyzed from the Red Sea and the Mediterranean. And to make the story short, we basically discovered that all of the recent population for the different species are actually recent invaders, because they don't even have one genetic mutation that distinguish them from the Red Sea. So we have proof of massive invasion. Another very interesting opportunity to study global warming in the Eastern Mediterranean is provided by the Hadera power plant station. The station pumps seawater to cool the turbines and then bring it back to sea, much heated, creating a heat patch that extends few kilometers to the south. So we selected two stations here, H2, which represent an extreme unrealistic scenario of 10-degree warming, and H4 representing a 1.5 degree warming, which is a realistic scenario, of course. And then a control station in Nachshalim located about 20 kilometers to the north. And what we first did is an simple ecological and environmental monitoring of these stations and or these sites. And as you can see here, these are temperature records from loggers that took measurements every 15 minutes. You can see the warm Hadera station and Nafsholim. And here you see a simplified statistical analysis of the dominant species. And what I would like you to see that these blue group, which all of them are successful Lesepsin invaders, actually avoiding even the H4 station. So meaning that they're already experiencing their upper thermal threshold in terms of so they're living within their upper thermal threshold. So, and the green one, they are able to tolerate 1.5 degree, but we don't find them in the warmest station. And we were quite surprised to actually find species living in the warmest station. Just to remind you, these are 10 degrees warmer than the ambient environment. And this kind of go against the paradigm that calcifiers are not supposed to suffer warm temperatures. And this was really surprising results. And one of them actually is the symbiont-bearing species, which is also quite surprising. So the next thing that we decided to do is to answer the question whether these species actually just survive these extreme warmth, or are they able to perform or to function as foraminifera, meaning to calcify shells. So in order to answer this question, we use a highly sophisticated technique using laser ablation mass spectrometer. That with this laser, we drilled very tiny holes in the shells, in different parts of the shells, and we got the high resolution profiles of all the chemical elements that were present in the calcite. And in this particular case, we used the magnesium calcium ratio, as a measurements for the calcification temperature. This is a known proxy, namely for temperature reconstruction, namely that the higher the magnesium content, the higher the temperature, and we can calculate this relationship with the calibration equation. So basically, we analyzed all the specimens that were taken from the field, and we're able to see that based on their magnesium concentration in the shell, that they're actually able to calcify at 40 degrees. And this was quite an astonishing, and even we received a high profile publication, and this is unusual for foraminifera people, and we were so excited. And this is just because it goes a little bit against the paradigm that calcifiers are very sensitive to warm temperature. And this means that there are some exceptions that are highly tolerant, exceptional calcifiers that are able to tolerate extreme warmth, and they will probably be the dominant component of ecosystem in the near future. And so we now think that this specific species, it might be so successful, doing well in high temperature due to the special diatom symbionts, but this is a question that we still need to investigate. Another very interesting outcome, which is not related to climate change, but to anthropogenic pollution, is by receiving these chemical profile of the shells, we unintentionally discovered that all of the foraminifera recorded some levels of heavy metal pollution, which is not expected for these areas that are considered clean according to the nature monitoring records. So this actually showed us that we have quite a successful tool, a strong tool for reconstructing or documenting marine heavy metal pollution using foraminifera as a living loggers. So this is quite exciting, and we're trying to develop it further now. One last story is that we're focused on is a story about a very successful, the most successful Lesepsin invader, a species called Amphistygina lubifera. It's actually so successful that it's considered as living sand. And you can see the high numbers of these round shells that actually creates sand. It is considered as the worst invading species in the Mediterranean. And what was very interesting for us, that this species has a sibling species, which they're both present in the Red Sea. It's called A. lesoni. And one is a successful invader and the other one is not found in the Mediterranean. And we suspected that A. lesoni is not able to invade the Mediterranean just because the winter temperature are too cold. So to investigate this, to answer this question, we basically took the specimens to the lab and gave them, they basically cultured them under normal seawater. And in the lab, we are able to separately evaluate the well-being of the foraminifera and their symbiont by measuring the same drop of water in where they live in. So for the foraminifera, we basically measure the chemistry of water. It's called the alkalinity measurements, and it's a proxy for the calcification rate of how well the foraminifera is doing. And for the symbiont, we measure from the same drop of water, the oxygen concentration as a proxy, a very simple proxy for the net photosynthesis. And so with this method, we were able to answer the question why A. lobifera is a successful invader. And this is just an example of the calcification rate. As you can see, in 20 degrees, A. lobifera is doing much better than A. lesoni. And this very small difference basically makes this species a successful invader in the Mediterranean and creates sand. And this one is still stuck in the Red Sea. So our next step now is to use molecular analysis, transcriptome analysis, the RNA expression of the DNA to identify the molecular response, the molecular footprint of stress, of heat stress in these foraminifera. And we conducted temperature experiments using low, regular, and high temperature. And this is a very interesting, one of the interesting outcome of this study, showing this yellow part is the performance of the symbionts, showing that at low temperatures, they actually need to overexpress many of the genes responsible for photosynthesis. While looking at the physiological experience, when we measured the oxygen, there were no differences between the low temperatures and the other treatments, meaning that the symbionts have to produce massive amount of, or a large amount of these genes just to perform in the same, to keep the same level of performance. So this is exactly the message of the Red Queen to Alice. It takes all the running you can do to keep in the same place. And this is a really nice example for that. So that's it. I want to thank all my great team. I have lots of graduate students, very incredible group. And I also have really nice partnership with my life partner, Uri Abdu. He's a molecular biologist, and we collaborate a lot of the genetic studies. And that's it. You are all welcome to visit my very nice office in Israel on your next visit. Thank you so much.
Very good. Professor Abramovich, thank you so much. Fascinating stuff. And we're going to open it up to questions in just a moment. Okay. We'll have Professor Chamovitz join us as well. I'll bet you have very interesting conversations with your life partner, considering both of you are in this field. I'd like to actually begin with a question directed to Professor Chamovitz. There was an article that was published recently in the Jewish Independent out of Vancouver, and it featured the story of the New School of Climate Change and Sustainability. You were quoted in this article. The first two fellowships for the school are actually funded by RBC in Western Canada. Professor Chamovitz, maybe you can tell us some more about the mission of the school.
Well, the mission of the school is quite clear to me. It's understanding that solutions for the future is going to need the collaborations of people from diverse disciplines. Just as Sigal talked about, her partner is a Drosophila geneticist, who I've actually worked with in the past, in my past life as a researcher. And when you get a Drosophila geneticist working with a geologist who also does oceanography, you get amazing science. Mm-hmm. And if you now do this on a global scale, when you get geologists and geographers and biologists and people with specialties in public policy and in public health and engineers who are building solutions, you're going to get outputs that are not possible by each person working alone.
Very good. And the next question actually comes to us from David Davis. He's out in Winnipeg. This question is directed to Professor Abramovich. And the question is, why is it that the Mediterranean Sea is the best body of water to study the effect of global warming on the species you are examining?
Well, as I said, specifically, what is interesting about the Mediterranean is the eastern part of the Mediterranean, because it is already showing quite clearly the global warming trend. So we know that it started, it is now quite profound. So we can already look at the biological impact of this warming on the local organism. And one of the major consequences of this warming is almost a turnover of the entire endemic local population and replacement by Lesepsin invaders. And this is seen not only by foraminifera. You can see the replacement of the fish population, and we have the visit of the jellyfish every summer, which is quite well, it has a great impact on our life and on the local economy. So it is and it is very accessible, and it also represents quite nicely one of the warmest and saltier body of water. So it's like a classical example of what's going to happen in other tropical areas when they're going to get warmer and saltier.
And a follow-up question, obviously we're in Canada, a much colder temperature up here than what you experience in Israel, and specifically in the Negev as well. The question is, if BGU is located in the desert, how is it able to address glacial cycles in freezing areas of the globe?
Oh, let me take that one in the beginning.
Okay.
You know, while our DNA as a university was born in the desert, we've grown over 50 years. Mm. We have 800, over close to 900 faculty members, and that has allowed us to attract the best and the brightest like Sigal. So the fact that we are in the desert doesn't limit us to studying the desert. And the fact that I am defined as a plant biologist doesn't limit me to only studying plants, just as the fact that Sigal is a geologist by training doesn't mean she also does biology. So what the most important thing about a research university is that we attract and nurture the best minds, and then they can attack any process, any problem around the world. I know people who are Israeli who have spent summers in Antarctica because that was their research question. Now, from a Canadian point of view, while you're not going to be, desertification is not a danger right now in Canada. The thawing of the tundra is one of the largest contributors to greenhouse gases. This thawing of the tundra is going to be affecting weather and food production worldwide. And so it's essential that people all over the world use their expertise to study whatever they can. Sigal, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, we're, yes, exactly. This is when basically we are a global community studying global changes. So basically we're using different types of tools, everything that we get. So we can describe climate changes from ice core in the same time interval, discover these changes from geochemical analysis of foraminifera taken from the Mediterranean or any other places in the world. So and we combine these data to create these reconstructions of Earth systems. So
we have another question here, and this is again open to both Professor Chamovitz and Professor Abramovich. How would you describe the state of Israel and Israeli society in terms of environmental consciousness?
I'll let you go for that one, Sigal.
I don't know. Well, we're getting there. We are improving. I think that, well, I have two teenager daughters, and I can see they're their attitude is much better than when I grew up. So there is a change, and I think that people have greater awareness of the importance of climate changes and climate change issues, and they're especially well, I'm kind of in I'm in the geology department, so all the students are highly aware of climate changes, are kind of an activist. So it's hard to know what is outside this environment. But I think that overall, I can see that people are taking actions and are more involved in these issues.
From a policy point of view, Israel as a maturing society, as moving from a country that always saw itself under threat to a country that sees itself as part of the global game, has also evolved also. Whereas when Sigal was a child, there was a lot of environmental awareness to protect the country, that you don't cut wildflowers. But it wasn't looking at a global stage, that we were, we had the Society for the Protection of Nature already 50 years ago. But this came into clash with the idea that we have to develop the country, we have to develop the country, we have to develop the country. But now, as we're making the next step to a mature country, for example, we should be a world power in solar energy. But we've only made this step over the past decade. But now already, I think it's 7% or something like that of our electricity is now solar.
Oh, wow.
And it makes sense. We were the first large-scale desalination in the world was in Ben-Gurion University, actually the predecessor of Ben-Gurion University, the Institutes for Negev Research. So in the beginning, we were looking for applications to allow us to live in the desert. And this is moving now to understanding that if we don't find solutions, everyone is at risk.
It's interesting. This next question that we have is a great follow-up to your response. How will the new School of Global Climate Change Impact affect existing schools and institutes at BGU, and specifically the Blaustein Institutes for Desert Research?
Oh, sure. We didn't go into many details about how the school is structured. First of all, the name of the school is the School of Sustainability and Climate Change, because it's realizing it's the intersection of these two interests. How do we live our life sustainable? The school itself is unique in its structure, maybe something that only in Israel we could come up with. I said in my talk that there's 150 research labs. This includes the 60 labs at the Blaustein Institutes. And we are not taking people out of their home departments. Everyone has a specific specialty, whether I'm a biologist, a desert researcher, a geologist, someone in public policy, someone in environmental engineering, but they're all coming together. The question that we had to deal with in building the school is, how do we teach interdisciplinarily? We've already done excellent jobs at doing interdisciplinary research, but what we need to do is train the next generation of experts, of social scientists who understand the science, and of scientists who understand the intricacies of public policy. And so it's by taking all of these experts, whether in water, in desert, in ocean, and having them teach together and realizing that that makes a better graduate student. I saw this in my Food Security Institute. When my plant genetics students took classes in international development and understood the implications of their research, they were better researchers.
Very good. Thank you for that. Another question, this one is for Professor Abramovich. Does your finding of calcification at higher temperatures have any bearing to the death of corals undergoing heat stress? This is a very specific one.
Yeah, this is an excellent question, because most corals experience high stress when they're exposed to high temperature. They basically bleach, meaning that they lose their algal symbionts. And this is a sign of death for corals because they highly depend on the symbionts. And this is similar to foraminifera. But the fact is that we're also coral people, they already know that some specific corals, they have higher tolerance to temperatures, to warm temperatures. So that means for us, like in the biological point of view, in order to understand the ecosystem response to global changes, we need the specific details. We need to know which species will suffer or highly sensitive, which one are more tolerant, and what is the threshold for these tolerant species. Mm-hmm. So the case of this calcifier that I was describing is completely unusual. It is a crazy species that we don't know. It is becoming so abundant in the Eastern Mediterranean that we know that it follows the warming. And it has an exceptional biological molecular basis, which is still unknown. We're planning to spend some time working on it and understand how it functions. But it's not it doesn't have any analogy for corals in that case, because it has completely different symbionts. So the entire story about calcifiers is that we have to get specific knowledge for the different groups or species in order to understand their fate in future world.
We've got another technical question here. What is your opinion on the seeding of various mammals in the Arctic regions to combat the thawing of cold weather regions?
I have no idea.
I've never heard of that.
No, okay.
But Galit, I do want to say that it's not, global warming is not inevitable. We, in our lifetime, can reverse the trends by changes in many, many ways in the way we are living, by changes in the way we do agriculture, by changes I mean, for example, we have natural organisms that sequester carbon dioxide. They're called plants. They're called trees. What we've been doing in Israel by planting plants, helps reduce global warming. If we change the way we do agriculture and no longer release the soil and all the bacteria which are releasing their gases into the air, that has a major effect. If we go to carbon-free, if we stop using fossil fuels, that has an effect. There's many, many things that we can do in our lifetime. I don't know anything about this seeding that he was talking about, that can have a major effect if we change policy. But we need the knowledge to know what that is.
Okay, I'll ask the person who asked this question if they can, in the interim, clarify their question, but we'll move on to the next one in the meantime. A very fascinating question. Do you have a personal favorite project that in your time at the university you've worked on? If so, what is it? Tell us a little bit more about it.
That's for you, Sigal.
Me? I don't know. It's hard to say. I love working on foraminifera, and my students always. I'm a micropaleontologist. Actually, this is my training. I was trained in Princeton to study fossil foraminifera. So and I have my lab is split it to students working on fossil foraminifera and living ones, and I always. People ask me, what do I like most, fossils or living ones? And I can't answer that. They're both really nice. So as long as I'm working on foraminifera, I'm quite happy. And the most fascinating project is that when I discover something which is completely new that I didn't know about them, I'm investigating them for over 20 years. And it's really exciting, and especially when I find something which is more, well, I always love to do basic sciences, and I think basic science is really important, but if I find something which is highly applicable, this is something that makes me very, very happy. So that's it.
Very good. And just before we wrap up, I see our CEO, Mark Mendelson, has joined us. Before we wrap up, I'd like to finish these webinars with a future-looking question. And looking ahead, what can we all look ahead to when it comes to this area of study? Obviously, we have the School of Sustainability and Climate Change. That's a very exciting project, and I'm sure we'll hear a lot more about it. What else?
Well, look ahead at this, it's how are we now positioned as Ben-Gurion University to change the world? You know, if I can go back to my time on the tractor, what was my goal? It was to change the world. 5 months ago, I got an email from a major research institute in Dubai, okay, just with the Abraham Accords. They are looking to partnership with Ben-Gurion University of the Negev.
Wow.
Because of our reputation of what we've already done in the past to learn how to live in the desert in order to help them with their issues. If we look at all of the models, has the United Arab Emirates on the one hand becoming almost as hot as Mars. On the other hand, they're going to be inundated with rising ocean levels. So you need both oceanography and desert research and climate research and climate engineering and water. You know, you need this interdisciplinary knowledge in order to plan now for tomorrow's threats. If we use COVID-19 as an example, why was Pfizer and Moderna primed for success? Because they planned for a platform that could respond quickly to viruses, whereas everyone else was left flat-footed. We have to plan now for the future threats so that we're not caught off guard.
And it looks like BGU is perfectly positioned for that. Sigal, did you want to share your sort of exciting news about the future? What are you looking forward to the most?
Well, I can't wait that for the establishment of the school. I think that it's going to bring a lot of exciting new collaboration between the different researchers there. I just by working on the school, I was introduced to researchers that I've never talked or met before, and it was super exciting. So I think it will open many new opportunities just by collaborating with strengthening the collaboration between different researchers, and I think that all of them are highly motivated to make this school quite successful. So I'm looking forward to that. I can't wait.
Yeah, Galit, I want to say one thing. What people don't realize is that science and innovation has a fuel, and it's not a carbon fuel. It's coffee. And when people from diverse disciplines can meet to drink coffee, that's the magic that yields solutions and innovations and new things that we never thought of.
I love that. I love that. Thank you so much. I think I'll hand it over now to Mark. Thank you both. This was really fascinating and eye-opening. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Galit.
Guys, first of all, for the first time in 16 webinars, I had some computer glitch and I couldn't get onto Zoom. But you, as always, I mean, two fascinating and brilliant researchers. And I realized I should have paid much more attention in my biology 100 class at McGill. But that was in 1966, probably before any of you were born.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, I appreciate that, but not quite.
I did learn a couple of things that are even more familiar between me and Danny. Number one, we both love to drive tractors on kibbutz. Number two, although while Danny was thinking about changing the world, while I was driving my tractor in the Golan Heights, I was just thinking of getting home safely and not being shot at by a Syrian soldier. I have to tell you, it was fascinating. And so thank you so much for taking time out of your extremely busy schedules. And it's not often that we can feature Danny as president and Professor Sigal as a senior lecturer at the university together in such a captivating subject. Huge thank yous to our listening audience for supporting us and the outstanding Ben-Gurion University. And of course, like all universities, we need and we rely on our friends to support the research being conducted there. So if you have inkling, a few shekels to spare, if you'd like to name a building, if you'd like to name a new photon, I don't know, call one of our executive directors in one of our offices or call me directly, and we will gladly help you in this endeavor and support our outstanding research. Thank you so much to my staff across Canada, our outstanding national lay leadership, as well as my excellent colleagues in Israel. And now I will thank Danny, President Chamovitz, as a colleague and not as a participant. Vice President Jeff Kay and his team, and of course my colleague in the States, CEO of the American Associates, Doug Sesserman. Stay tuned for our next webinar on March 3rd called Cannabis as a Treatment for Autism Spectrum Disorder, and featuring our #1 team, or Israel's #1 team in autism research, led by Professor Ilan Dinstein and his outstanding group of researchers. There might be some fascinating news emanating from that area in the not too distant future, so stay tuned. And a reminder that this Sunday, we will be holding a virtual and interactive art tour of the collection of art at Ben-Gurion University, and we have almost 400 people already registered. It should be an outstanding and fascinating hour. 1 week from today, we will be holding another joint webinar with the Israel Medical Association in Canada on the interesting subject of medical ethical decision-making during a pandemic. For that, we also have more than 250 people already registered. So we are doing tremendous things in Canada, and with the help and partnership of our friends at Ben-Gurion. Check out the registration for both events. And now I'd like to give a shout out to our staff team in Canada for their outstanding efforts, and Galit for seamlessly moving in and taking over. I think I can see that my executive directors are saying, gee, maybe she'll become the grand fromage and take over for Mark.
Oh, you didn't see me sweating, Mark.
Until February, I wish you a COVID-safe 3 weeks. Until actually March, I wish you a COVID-safe few weeks. Keep social distancing, and let's hope that vaccines will start being distributed in Canada in 1/10 of the manner in which they have already been in Israel, because we are number 27 on the list of countries in the world giving out vaccinations. Thank you, and kol hakavod to Dr. Tal Zaks, our BGU med school and PhD graduate, and of course to Professor President Daniel Chamovitz and Professor Sigal Abramovich. Fascinating subjects. Thank you again, and let's all be safe and stay COVID-free.
Thank you very much.